Thank you, Chair. I want to keep time for answers, so just a very quick, huge, big thank you to all of you for your contributions today and submissions. They've been so informative and helpful. I have two quick questions, but I just kind of want to touch on, the issue of things around surveys and guidelines and all of these things over and over again. And I think there is a real understandable frustration with these things when, like Dr. McDonough has said, we don't need them to know how people are discriminated in Ireland, people with disabilities. It's very clear. Like you mentioned, you look at the houses of the Oireachtas, there isn't a single member, So I think especially during COVID, and like you said, all of these problems existed before COVID, this has really highlighted them, but for resources to be going into things that we already know when they should be going, I think oftentimes as a society we've made the mistake of telling people what's best for them without actually asking them. And those resources could be going into things that, perhaps maybe better spent. And I think just as a committee, I hope we don't follow that kind of suit. I've quickly two questions. Every question we come back to the emphasis on the importance of ratifying the optional protocol. It seems to be this is the thing that we absolutely need to do. Noting that we're one of 6 EU countries to not have done that. I'm wondering if there's barriers that any of you are aware of in the ratification of that, or is it a matter of just keeping the pressure on the individual departments? Any information that would be fantastic. And I suppose in the submissions I saw the stress for the need for direct participation for people with disabilities in this committee. And of course in other committees too, and that's fantastic. But for example, in today's interaction, it's not only ineffective, but also exclusionary for many of the people that we hope to work with. So having previously worked in disability, I know we need more proactive approaches to meaningfully involve people, and I'm wondering if anybody could give us direction or suggest people we could talk to in order to adapt our methods here to make that more effective. I'd especially like response from Dr. McDonough, if that's okay, but from everybody else, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Paddy?
If you don't mind, I need a moment to catch my breath. But I love your question, and thank you around the wasted resources on stuff we already know. Sinead, maybe you'll pick up.
On the optional protocol, really, it's just up to this committee to keep the pressure up. We will be keeping the pressure up. I mean, just to make you aware that as the independent monitoring mechanism designate, we are prepared and ready and preparing and ready, and part of that has been the establishment and implementation of our Disability Advisory Committee. So that committee has been going through the CRPD article by article with really in-depth exploration of what that looks like. So it's just a question, I would argue, of keeping that pressure on. And in terms of the participation piece, again, it's in the convention, really. I mean, it's about opening up your doors and being open. I mean, as there's so many women represented here in this particular committee, I think you're very much aware of the pathway to politics for women and the barriers that you have, I'm sure, experienced on an individual level, but as a gender that we have experienced. And it's similar. I mean, the way I see it, and as somebody who's in a position of influence myself, I am here because of the privileges that I hold. And I see it as my right and obligation to open the doors for people who don't have those privileges in the work that I do. And that's how you need to see it. That's what you need to do. I mean, Rosaleen mentioned unconscious bias. The single most effective way to combat unconscious bias is exposure to the groups who you hold that bias towards. If you have not worked closely with someone with a disability, if you haven't been around and had to facilitate somebody who has a disability, you simply can't know. So that's really what it's about, is just, I think there's a level of humility that everybody in this room will have to take on in really exposing yourself to the voices of those people who have the lived experience. And that's the spirit that I would encourage you to take on, particularly around participation. Thank you, Deputy Kearns.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your question. questions. I would agree with Sinead about the barriers to the ratification of the optional protocol. Our understanding is that Minister O'Gorman wants to go through the first reporting cycle where there are amendments or adjustments to Ireland's procedures to be made. They can all be made at the one time. And there are aspects of the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Bill that should address some of those things. The idea in being that everything is in place before we ratify the optional protocol is the government's preferred approach, but we would advise the prompt attention to it. In terms of approaches to greater inclusiveness, first of all, it would be remiss of me if I didn't plug universal design. So the universal design of procedures and policies and premises and even communication styles, all of these things will help ensure that situations are created so that people with disabilities can input and join processes in a way that accommodates their various needs. So again, there are guidance and toolkits there, but also the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth is just establishing the participation network. And while the first duty of that network may be to consult on the state party report, we would urge that it becomes a long-standing mechanism and that it is not just for that department to interact with, but for all committees, all branches of government and public bodies to interact with that network so that they are hearing directly from people with disabilities about the issues that impact on them.
And if I could just add in maybe just the NDA or the Secretariat for the Disability Stakeholders Group, which is a group of people with disabilities and people from, say, representative organisations who are very embedded, appointed by the Minister, but they're very embedded in the monitoring process of the National Disability Inclusion Strategy. So they sit on all the disability consultative committees within the government departments, which are responsible for monitoring the strategy actions within those government departments. And then they sit on the steering group, which is chaired by the Minister. So there is already, a lot of integration there. I mean, there could be more, and there always can be more, but I think that is a good step that's there. You mentioned just recommendations, and we could probably supply you with lots of recommendations of people to talk to, just specifically on intellectual disabilities. I don't know if you're inviting Mary McCarran and the Trinity Centre for Ageing and Intellectual Disability, but I think that would be one person, but we can follow up and give you lots of recommendations around that if you wish.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it. Rosemary.
Chair, thank you again for indulging. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but it seems reasonable given that I have a lived reality. That said, I suppose I would like, in order to answer or contribute to your analysis, I would ask us all to reflect. Ireland has had an appalling record and relationship with disabled people. I'm thinking of the Ryan Report, disabled and deaf children. I'm also thinking of the mother and baby homes, and a lot of women with learning disabilities were shoved in there. Those of us who weren't adopted were usually disabled. So, and I just, we also, in more recent times, have had the awful experience of people living in Oris Attracta. Now, all those issues may have subsided in the minds of you and in mainstream Ireland, but for disabled people, those memories and those realities go on each day that the optional protocol is delayed. Also, we need a shift in our language, and we need to acknowledge ableism is a form of discrimination that we experience, but also ableism has been a tool in how we write legislation, relate pointed to disabled people, how we think about disabled people, ableism comes in. We see it in the media, we see it on our national airways, so we really need a much more dynamic and much more human rights approach. And also, I would ask you, just for a moment, other than family members, if any, how many disabled people sat beside you when you were doing your leaving cert? How many disabled people sat beside you when you were doing your finals in college? How many disabled people were on an interview panel that were interviewing you for your first job? And that's very telling.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just to alert members.